Hello and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. Today we're looking at the issue hydrology, which is an important part of the energy mix across Europe, not least in the Nordic region, where it forms a major part of how electricity is produced. It's a great honour to have Eylert Ellefsen with us today. Welcome, Eylert.
Hello, thank you, Richard.
Also known as Mr Hydrology.
That's according to Hugo.
Hugo, your boss. Eylert has been covering this market for many years, and now he recently joined Energy Quantified, who has offices just next door to us in Montel. Also joining me is Gert over Mollestad, who's our Nordic reporter. Welcome to you, Gert.
Hello, thank you.
If I can start off, Eylert, and talk about the Nordic region. What's happening in terms of hydrology at the moment here? You know, reservoir levels, rainfall, what's happened to the snow in the mountains, etc.
Yes, what has happened, we saw by first weeks of May, a very strong inflow period due to mild weather, high temperatures. And now it's been more cold, so the inflow level have been more moderate, or quite low for the season. But snow levels are, we think, according to EQ numbers and comparing to NVE, the snow reservoir level, about
NVE. That's the Nordic Ministry or the
Regulator.
The regulator, exactly. Yes.
So there we have numbers around between 15 and 20 terawatt hours deficit in snow in Norway.
In snow.
And snow and soil. So,
okay. So the hydro deposits in the snow as well as the snow above it.
Yeah, because and the reservoir levels are close to normal after this strong inflow incident start of May. If we look to Sweden, we had the same inflow incident there, a very strong first part of May, and then the reservoir levels are close to normal at the moment, but the snow level are still a bit lower than normal. I think about 5 terawatt hours, something. So I think overall we have something around 20 terawatt hours deficit in the Nordic region.
Deficit compared to normal level?
Compared to normal level.
Okay.
And most of this, or nearly everything, is related to snow and soil content.
Is this also what you're hearing in the market at the moment, Gert?
Well, I think there are some reports that are stating a bit more positive outlook, that there's a bit more hydropower reserves in the system. So I've seen around a deficit around 10 terawatt hours. But it might depend that different analysts use different norms, so they refer to different historical backgrounds. So that might be an explanation why the figures varies quite a lot.
Okay, yeah.
But there's definitely a large deficit in the snow reservoirs, and you can the figures from the regulator states that the reservoir levels are about normal or a bit above normal.
Energy stored in snow, if you like,
precisely.
and then the energy stored in reservoirs. There is some deficit compared to recent years.
Yeah,
so how does it compare to recent years then, Gert?
Well, we had a severe drought last year, which really pushed up prices during summer, and that deficit kind of lasted all through the year, even though it was a major inflow in last autumn. So we have been on the negative side all through this winter, more or less.
Is that a view you share here?
Yes, of course. We see these numbers historically, and I think for last year, quite interesting that we had a very dry Q2 period. We started. Also dry Q3, but the winter and the snow reservoirs in last year was quite higher, I think. So it depends on the situation for the summer now is very dependent on the precipitation. We are very sensitive for a dry period. If it happens again, then we already have this deficit of, let's say, 15-20 terawatt hours if we compare other sources. Then I think this is represents an import situation for the Nordic system.
Okay, so if there is no rain which will boost or bring the deficit up towards zero, then we're in for a period of high prices then for the rest of the year in the Nordic region. I mean that.
Yes, and how strong these prices will be depends also on the hydropower situation across Europe. If there's also a dry period, as we saw last summer in the CWE area, prices, German and French prices increases, and then we'll see more or less the same prices in the Nordic region.
We'll come back to the European markets later, but if we stick in the Nordic region, and what's looking out the window, it seems quite dry at the moment, but there have been forecasts of much wetter weather. Certainly May has been quite wet. What's your view here? I know you're not a meteorologist, but
I have not really followed the long-term forecast lately. But if you look to prices, how they have come out in May, Nordic and European prices, or the German prices, have been quite close to each other.
At what kind of levels?
I think about 35.
35 yeah. But this is the spot prices, yeah?
Yeah, spot prices. So, and if we look to let's say market prices, they are still in favor of higher German prices, but this can easily be turned around or come close to each other.
Okay, yeah. Gert, what you?
Yeah, we got a new 4-week forecast yesterday, and which stated that there might be a possibility for a blocking high pressure system over the Nordic region from 10th of June.
Okay.
So if we are to enter a really dry period, then prices in the Nordic region would really go up. Of course, the short-term forecasts are quite wetter than normal, but they are only covering the next 10 days. So if the long-term signal of a shift to a dry pattern, that might be bullish for prices, obviously.
Yeah.
And should we have a repetition of the drought we saw last year, that would be really an upside potential.
Unlike many others, exactly.
Exactly.
So it'd be nice for people living in Norway with maybe a dry, hot summer, but in terms of electricity prices, maybe not so good.
No, but for the trade, I think there's a saying among Norwegian power traders there that there's nothing better than 2 dry years in a row.
So this is potentially we're going there, and what's the market saying in terms of how high prices could go, or what the impact could be? Gert, I mean, if I could start with you.
The latest days prices have come down a bit, so we are
the forward prices
for
Q3 and Q4.
Yeah, and the June contract are trading currently at 35.25, a bit down today, and the Q3 contract are at 37. Which is for Norwegian and for Nordic prices, this is quite high. For summer prices, they usually tend to be quite low due to the low demand. So they're clearly are priced in a bit.
There's the premium there towards potentially a dry summer,
or at least coming from a higher level due to the relatively poor hydro stocks.
Of course, absolutely. Eylert, is this how you view it as well?
Yeah, and I think I don't think we should frighten so very strong prices even in the Nordic region, even by a rather dry period. But I think if temperatures are getting really high with the evaporation, then it can really spike also in the German market. But if the German market doesn't really spike, I think we have a kind of roof there on the Nordic prices. They won't get so much higher than the German prices.
So the German prices will cap the Nordic ones.
I think cap the Nordic price. And the German prices are then kept, let's say, at a rather moderate level. We also see quite moderate level in the Nordic prices. So let's say maybe if we look to market prices of today, see prices of 38, 39 maybe.
For what? For
the Nordic market, if they equalizes or equals the German prices as we see today.
So they've got a bit of an upside there, potentially.
Quite limited, but if then the German prices spikes, then we can see something else.
Exactly, then we're going in a different dimension, potentially. Yeah. What I can hear from both of you is that, given a dry period, then the Nordic region will be very reliant on imports.
Obviously.
Doubt
about that.
Yeah. Moving on to the European situation and the Central European situation, there's what's happening there, Eylert? I mean, these are also markets that are quite sensitive to hydrology, and that has a big impact on the price formation, specifically in France, Switzerland, Austria, maybe.
Yeah. Because there you have a combination of, let's say, precipitation and temperature. So let's say the bullish situation, you have a low precipitation, but the impact of high temperature means maybe more. Because what you see for France, for example, if the rivers are declining their levels, you don't have the cooling possibility to nuclear plants, and you have then the price effect on this.
Mm.
So there's not only, let's say, pure hydropower impact of low inflows and high temperatures,
but also impact on the thermal output
yeah.
at both coal plants and nuclear in France.
And we also seen that on the coal import along the Rhine, for example. I think this was really severe last year. I think the Rhine level are not that low today. I haven't all these details today. But what is, if you look to France, for example, and the snow situation there at the end of April was rather low at 25 percentile. So 1 or 4 years were lower. But then during May we had some strong precipitation periods, particularly first part of May, across the Alps, in fact.
And this came as rain or as snow?
Snow, because a rather low temperature for some period. And so I think also France has now improved their snow situation, so not so close from normal. But Switzerland...
Below normal or
they are now,
around normal.
Nearly reach normal. This is my interpretation. I haven't all the details. But if you look to Switzerland, which have had very strong precipitation during the winter, and also had a very strong precipitation period first part of May, they have some regions, they have 150 to 200% of normal snow.
Okay, so it's still possible to go skiing maybe in Switzerland.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
But I think you have to go above 2,500 meters.
Okay, yeah.
So I think Switzerland, have a warm period. Then the inflows can be quite strong. So you can have quite a sudden impact of increased hydropower.
Which would then impact the spot prices.
Yeah, then you have a reduction in spot prices.
That would be my next question. What would be the impact on these higher snow levels in both France and Switzerland on prices in these markets, or in neighbouring markets even, in the coming weeks and months?
Of course, this is a bearish information, and this also means that if you get a dry period, you still have some quite decent snow levels, so you will have inflows and melting water from these areas, which means that it takes a while before if you get low river levels in France, for example, you won't get that in June. Maybe you have to wait until July. If you get a dry period now, it will take a while.
It'll take a while to hit. But these markets are also, so there is a run of river production in these countries, but there's also reservoirs. How do these two interact in the French and Swiss markets?
This is much more, let's say, the Rhone River share is much higher in France. In Switzerland you have, this is the country with the reservoirs in Europe. So you have, I would say, Austria with the Danube. You have Rhone River, very Rhone River influenced. And you also France is quite Rhone River.
And Germany?
Germany, okay, it's only Rhone River.
Yeah, okay, so,
but it doesn't mean so much.
Yeah,
so I think it's the impact from the other countries, France, Switzerland and Austria.
So this could have a bearish influence on spot prices in these markets in June, you would say?
In the first, let's say, impact, if you get a warm period, you have strong melting, and then you have a bearish impact. Yeah. But later on, okay, everything can happen. Yeah. But I think you won't have a bullish impact from hydropower from Europe before potentially end of June. I think it will...
So it could to be July and August when it could start to hit a bit more.
I think so.
How does that compare to recent years in these markets? I mean, often, it seems to be a recurring problem, certainly in France and a little bit in Germany, that you have low river levels and also high temperatures in these rivers.
Yeah, I think it can happen in July, where because if you come into August, you also have the vacation period in France, don't have that strong consumption. So if you can reach high temperature already in July, or let's say in July, and low river levels, there you have price spikes in July, which will be not so, let's say, apparent in August.
I mean, have you done looked at any of the current river levels, like the Rhone or the Rhine, or even the Vistula in Poland? I mean, these were historically have been quite low in recent years. I mean, down to 40, 50 centimeters.
Yeah, and I think it's the Rhone and the Rhine which are the most interesting, which I see is more sensitive for, let's say, because you have the impact of coal transport along the Rhine, and in the Rhone and neighboring rivers in France, you have cooling water from 2 nuclear plants, which is an additional impact from low hydropower.
And I know that you guys at EQ are looking at this data quite closely.
Yeah,
and potentially going public with some of it soon.
You will have this information from EDF, for example.
Yeah, okay.
And from the German Ministry of Hydrology or Meteorology.
The information on river levels and temperatures is quite public, is quite easily accessible in Germany. In France, less so. Certainly for temperatures, I think EDF is very good at publishing when there are problems, but they don't give indication of what the actual river temperatures are or levels. What's going on in Spain, for example? That's a neighbouring market to France, Eylert, and that's had maybe a bit of a boost in this year?
But in general, I would say hydropower in Spain, summertime is very low. Because of strong evaporation, the precipitation profiles, you don't get that much precipitation in Spain in the Q2, Q3. So I think the strong variations in hydropower in Spain, you see that in Q4 and Q1.
Okay, but
because that's so the inflow levels are so low during summertime that if you run the calculations of this, you very easily come to negative inflows. They're so low. So I think with the reservoirs you have this storage capacity. So I don't think it's more in France, in Spain, if it gets very dry and hot, it's more water supply than hydropower problems.
Exactly. That's what they're looking for that, and for also for irrigation and for agriculture, that comes first rather than the hydro production. Absolutely. We haven't touched on another country which is very where hydrology is very important, and that's Austria. Have you had a look at Austria at all? Because that's important also for the southern parts of Europe and the Balkan region.
It's the Danube level. Honestly, I haven't these details of Danube, but in Austria are in a way divided between the Alpine system and the Danube-Rhone river system. So for me, it looks like you can have a rather normal outlooks currently for the Danube, but it's very important also for the Balkan system. What's happened with the Danube, but I don't see any strong variations from normal in the outlooks at the moment. And I think you can, for example, you have these climatic variations. You can have a very high temperature and dry period north of the Alps, which you don't see in the Balkan region because there's another climatic zone. So you can have quite different situations north and south of the Alps. So if you have a very warm period south of the Alps, also you have this normally in the Balkan region. So I think north and south of the Alps you can see quite different development.
What should the market be focusing on now in terms of hydrology, both in the Nordic region and in more central Western Europe? What are the key elements that obviously weather forecasts and the signs of and the forecast of precipitation, a little bit of a tricky word there, a little bit of a tongue twister. But what do you think, Eylert? What are the key elements that we should be looking out for?
I think for the Nordic region, it's the precipitation, and I think for June, I think temperature across Europe will be very interesting. If you have high temperature, you have a faster melting process, and then July, everything can happen then in July. Yeah, I think that's precipitation in Nordic and maybe temperature in the Alp region for the next month.
Not the other way around?
No, I think because you have the upside in prices.
Okay.
Of course, when you have high temperature in the Alps, more melting, you won't, let's say, give a bullish impact on spot prices, but that can come later. And in the Balkan region, always very sensitive for both a dry and a wet period. If you have strong variations from normal, prices will really follow the hydropower situation. And I think what I focused on when I focus on prices in the Balkan region, focus on the price difference Austria-Hungary. If you have strong hydropower, Hungarian prices are low, that means the Balkan prices are low level. Price differences to Austria will increase, and if you have limited hydropower across the Balkan. You have stronger Hungarian prices and then more limited price difference to Austria.
And Gert, do you agree with this view of what to look for in the Nordic region? I mean, are there any other elements that you think we should be aware of? Or
it's of course mainly by the weather-driven, especially in Norway and partly in Sweden as well. And but then you have had this massive build of wind power, which kind of reduces the dependency of hydropower in the Nordics. So even though we might have a deficit of 10 or perhaps 20 terawatt hours, the situation is not that strained due to the high amount of wind power. So the system, it would a couple of years ago, it would be much more severe with a deficit of 20 terawatt hours than it is today due to the high wind power in FID. But then again, this is also weather driven.
Of course.
So if you have a really nice weather, hot, warm, dry,
no wind,
so then you have a kind of this accumulating effect. So,
absolutely. Is this something you've modeled, Eylert, the impact of wind on the hydro and how the two interact at all?
Of course, I would say the equilibrium of the hydropower level was, let's say, earlier we had at hydropower balance or hydrological balance like 0. Then the Nordic system was in balance. Now we can say -10 or maybe -15 because you have more wind power, but it also depends on, of course, the nuclear capacity. So it's not only increased wind power. So I haven't really calculated how this equilibrium level point of hydrological balance has moved from, let's say, 0. Is it now -10 with the same, let's say, balance as we had at 0 in 2005, for example? That could be interesting to make a study of, but I haven't really made that.
And we have seen now that some Swedish and Finnish reactors have come back on schedule after maintenance period. So the nuclear production is quite strong in the Nordic region. So that is kind of a factor that is not bullish. It's clearly there's some concern of the low snow reservoirs, because I talked to a CEO of a quite large Norwegian utility last week, and I asked him if he was happy with the situation with the relatively high prices, and he said yes, of course it's high prices, but when you don't have that much water to produce, what good do they do?
Exactly.
High prices. So it's the situation is a bit mixed, you could say.
Strained and a bit mixed. And I think it's the same situation I think you're seeing in France and in Germany, where nuclear availability looks good at this point, but as you say, Eylert, should we have lower water levels and high temperatures in July, that situation could change quite quickly. So Eylert, thank you very much for taking us on a tour of hydrology from the Balkans up to Sweden and down to Spain. Very, very informative. Excellent. And Gert, thank you very much for your input. So please remember to follow us on Twitter, on LinkedIn, and you get all the latest news on hydrology on Montel News and also on EQ. Thank you very much. Goodbye.